slides to get us started. So as Dr. Sattler said, this workshop is topic transforming research into transportation policy, sort of ways and strategies to help scholars convert their scholarly knowledge into useful transportation policy that can be applied in the field. So the literature finds a few consistent barriers between research and policy, and these crop up throughout studies on this topic, so it's good to summarize them. The first and most common one that we see is the lack of professional connections and sort of networking, where the two groups might not know each other person to person. Academics tend to move around the country or around the world. They might live in a community where they don't know the local policymakers, and it takes time to build those relationships and to elevate it into something where you can work together as colleagues. So we'll examine some ways to overcome that obstacle. Another one is information asymmetries. Both of the camps are intelligent, productive, ambitious people, but they often speak in a different language or they use different skill sets. Political intelligence is often quite different from scientific intelligence, and sometimes a scientist may come up with a solution to a problem that they think is very sensible and easy, but the political reality is very different. And it's part of it's a communication barrier, but also just an understanding of the other person's position, the other person's experience. Another one that we hear from our stakeholders is technical language in studies and publications, a lot of jargon. Scholars, by tradition, publish their research in scholarly journals, publications, which that's the standard as peer review. But outside of academia, practitioners don't always read journals. In fact, at our workshop yesterday, they said they almost never read academic journals to get information. So even if you have interesting findings and good productive results, it won't get into the hands of the right people if it's published in the wrong place or full of the wrong terminology. So that's something to consider. There are competing demands for time and resources. This push to advance your network and to get out there and meet people in the community, you have a lot of competing time pressures. You have your courses, your graduate students, your research, your service commitments, and you might feel too busy to go to city council meetings or to look up who to talk to in the MPO or the state DOT. And also in the state agencies or the local government, they have cities to run and state governments to run. They can't always take a meeting with you to talk about this or that. We heard yesterday that from the stakeholders that there's more of a push to synchronize the calendars, where with an academic, you might do your heaviest research in the summer, your field work or your lab work in the summer, but for policymakers, they might be in the middle of their budget cycle to where their summer might be their busiest time of year, or they might be on vacation with their family. And sometimes they don't have time to sit down with you at the same time you do. So managing the time aspects can be part of it too. And also uncoordinated work processes where even if you have the same goals, ultimately, like improving air quality or making electric vehicles cheaper in your community, you might have different ways of going about that. Or you might be trying to approach it from two different angles at the same time, and only one of you is probably going to succeed because it's not coordinated. Maybe your efforts are duplicated or you're just not talking to each other. So that's something else to think about with this. This graphic I pulled from a workshop on this topic, a paid workshop that some people attend, but it boils it down to essentially decision makers aren't using your research because either they can't access it because it's in a journal that's expensive or full of technical jargon. They don't have the time to process it or to sit down and meet with you. And the jargon is too dense. They're not, technical professionals the same way you and I might be. There's over 2.5 million articles published. That's probably closer to 3 million now. Just 12% of those are in open access journals. We forget that, we work at universities, so we can read most of these journals for free as a job perk, library access. But outside of that, it can cost hundreds or thousands of dollars to subscribe to a journal just to read articles. So publishing in open access journals might be one way to get more people to read your content. So they recommend, and we do too, to go beyond the traditional research paper, which is why we do things like policy briefs and our podcast, is to encourage people to get information directly to the community. So those professional connections that are hard to establish, they're very useful once you have them, but it's hard to make that first step. Agencies and funders like CTEDD or other federal funders, we require evidence of relationships before we'll give you a grant. You have to submit stakeholder letters and list people's contact information to prove that you have at least made the effort. But that's often just a first step. Getting a letter of reference, a letter of support, it can take a while in terms of time, but it doesn't take as much effort as, say, a long-term, months or years-long friendship might. So it's difficult to get this if you're junior faculty or you just moved to the area. So one suggestion, or I guess a few suggestions we have, is to keep it simple, to consider your area of interest and just find one or two people and then focus on them. You don't need, your network does not have to be huge at the start. It can just be one or two good friendships. And try to connect in real time. Don't just send them an email. You get lots of emails every day, so do they. It's easy to ignore an email. And they don't always see your passion for your subject. If you're genuinely, passionate and interested in solving these problems, a face-to-face conversation or a phone call would make that come through. And they might be more likely to remember you and want to work with you if they see that you're really engaged on the topic and that you're not just sending an email. So those personal exchanges, as you can do them after COVID, it's always a good idea. It might be good manners to offer to assist them first. Don't email a stranger asking them to do something for you. If you can, maybe you read in the newspaper that the city council is considering something in your area, or they're moving into a new topic, like the MPO for North Texas, where we're located. They have working groups on things like drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, electric vehicles, microtransit. And they've been very productive at setting up these sort of task forces to look at these new technologies. And maybe that's your field. Maybe you can help them out with something. You can send them a note saying, I understand you're looking at microtransit. I'd love to talk about it. I'd love to help you out. And that can be a productive way to help them. They might be much more likely to open your email if you're offering to help them, because that is part of our job as scholars, as public intellectuals, is to serve the community around us. And these connections take time. It's difficult to have a fast friendship with somebody. It can take, working through an entire project or the span of several months to get to the point where it's an enduring professional tie that will serve you both over time. So it's similar to building any other human relationship. Start small and be honest and be constructive. On information asymmetries, this might be one of the most difficult for academics to sort of unlearn, because we process information the way we do, the way our campus does, and it's how we're trained to think and how we're trained to solve problems. So it can be hard to step outside of that. Policymakers, it's their job to know what's going on in the community and in the nation, not always what's going on in the literature. of theoretical work or the latest laboratory work. And at the same time, you as academics might not pay too much attention to local politics. You might be new to the community and not know who's on the city council or not know why the city you live in has poor transit or really good transit. And this can be overcome somewhat by finding things in common. Things like reducing your technical language. And if you want to show them you're an expert in a field, don't send them just your CV and a bunch of publications like you might send to an academic colleague. Send them something that's right to the point. They're often under a time crunch. Maybe you could send them, like, part of the reason we do policy briefs at CTEDD is to help you summarize your research in a 1 or 2 page, really simple policy-oriented document. It's a memo that somebody can skim in a few minutes and understand what you did and why you did it and how it can help them. So maybe share the policy brief, or if you're on Twitter, follow them on Twitter, something short and simple that anyone can hopefully understand. And these communication barriers are a big part of it. So anything you can do to make it simpler, it's a growth area for you as a scholar, as a student, to be able to talk about your work in a relaxed, casual way, a conversation, because you won't always be talking to fellow academics. One other thing is those time demands and career goals. As junior faculty, you're always looking for publications and stakeholders and looking to build your profile. A lot of policymakers have to worry about public opinion, elections, influence, and sort of power relationships. So it's sometimes frustrating if you work in the realm of policy as a researcher to come up with what you think is a simple solution to a problem. And you have to ask yourself, if the problem is so simple, why has society not solved it yet? There's usually more to it than that. And we deal in scientific facts, objective sort of things, but in policy, when dealing with the voters, the general public, it's not just about facts. There are emotions and relationships, and they have to answer to the voters. So even if something might seem totally rational and scientifically valid, that's not the end of the story. There's more to think about. There may be opposition to ideas, even if you've worked hard and your laboratory has ironed out all the issues. It may still face public scrutiny, and that's just a reality of policy work. Something CTEDD really pushes for, and we're glad to support it, is policy implementation of your research. It should not end with a journal publication or a line on your CV. It should end in something that serves the general public, the society and communities in which we live. And this is most effective when you start your projects with the stakeholder involved. When you're writing the proposal, before we even give you any money, if you sit down with these people who you've built somewhat of a relationship with and tell them, I want to solve a problem in this area. I want to help with transportation or housing or air quality. How can we work together to find a solution to a problem? And let them help you write the research questions. Let them give you recommendations on who to talk to and how to frame your process. It's a much more integrated process to do it this way than to write your report in your office and then mail it to them and say, here's a 200-page report, please put it to good use. They won't read it, they'll put it on a bookshelf. So work with them from the start as a true partner. They bring something to your team that you might not otherwise have, and get their feedback. If you send them a progress report and they tell you they don't understand what you wrote because it's too technical, that's legitimate feedback. That's something to think about. Or if they tell you your solution is not politically feasible, it would never get integrated into the system, take that into consideration too. You want to overcome those barriers so that your work actually makes a difference. So listen to their suggestions, make them a part of your team. And it's difficult to do for junior faculty and postdocs, but your goal ideally should not just be articles and publications for a tenure file. We're happy to support that, and that's part of what we do. But look at policy change. You know, you're engineers and urban planners and architects, and you got into this line of work to understand the situations around us and hopefully solve some problems. So here's your chance to do that and actually contribute to something. So CTEDD is happy to help you with that. We have tech transfer planning and community outreach. We can support you with that, but we hope you try to keep these things in mind. I think that's the stopping point, Dr. Sattler. I think this is the part where we change over to a panel.
All right, that sounds good. Thanks for the introduction, James. And were you going to then introduce the panelists?
Yes, I can do that. Well, yeah, I guess. So can I start with you because you organized the session?
Okay.
Dr. Melanie Sattler is a professor of civil engineering at the University of Texas at Arlington, and she holds an endowed chair. I don't quite remember how to pronounce the name, but she's a very well-renowned professor in civil engineering. She has completed a few projects with us that have a great deal of community involvement and transferability, and she's a great person to lead this discussion. Dr. Karabi Bezboruah is in the College of Architecture, Planning, and Public Affairs. She's a professor of public affairs, public policy. I forget which one. Okay. And she's also very active in the community and a great resource for building these relationships. And a lot of her work touches on systemic social issues. So I think she has a lot to say as well. Dr. Shams Tanvir is at the California Polytechnic State University, Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. He is in, I believe, civil engineering. And a lot of his work seems to touch right on that boundary between the technical and the accessible community research. So he's done a lot with technology transfer and encouraging students, especially to reach out into the community for their research goals. And we have Michael Morris, who is, I believe, Director of Transportation at the North Central Texas Council of Governments, NCTCOG, which is our MPO for North Texas. There's a great deal of transportation issues happening in North Texas. It's a very interesting place to have the conversation about transportation policy. We're very pleased to have him, and I hope he can share his lengthy expertise as a technical professional and someone who receives a lot of these sort of reports in his inbox from scholars. So maybe he can give feedback on what agencies look for and how best they could apply what you give them. So Dr. Sattler, would you like to get started with your piece? I believe a few of you have introductions you'd like to make or slides to share.
Okay, so the projects that I've worked on for CTEDD have involved conversion of food and yard waste to fleet fuel. So we've looked at doing that through anaerobic digestion. So at wastewater treatment plants, many times there's a digester that has microorganisms that are used to break down the sludge at the wastewater treatment plant and produce biogas. And the biogas is an energy resource. So when my group first started looking at the idea of converting food waste to biogas, we went and talked to some folks at the North Central Texas Council of Governments, and they were the ones actually who originally suggested that we target fleet fuel as an end use, rather than other kinds of things that you could do with biogas. And so they gave us that idea, and before we even applied for the CTEDD funding. So when we applied for CTEDD, we had North Central Texas Council of Governments as a stakeholder, and we also had City of Dallas as a stakeholder. And so our goal was to develop a tool that cities or regions could use to look at whether it might be financially feasible to convert food and yard waste to vehicle fuel. So it was designed as a high-level screening tool. EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, actually has a more detailed cost estimator for digesters. So it's called COEAT. And if you're at the point where you know you're going to build a digester and you have engineering plans and all of these details, and you want to know what is the cost going to be for your digester, then they have a spreadsheet tool that will do that. It requires 78 inputs, which is a lot of inputs, and a lot of those are detailed and specific to the engineering design. But what we wanted to do was develop something that would be higher level, a screening tool that people could use when they're looking at planning to see if this is even a feasible idea, right, before they get into the details. So the stakeholders been involved all along and have been really crucial to developing the tool. We've added stakeholders as we've gone along. We had, as I said, in the first year, North Central Texas Council of Governments and then City of Dallas. In the second year, we've added a couple of communities that we found were already collecting food waste, but they weren't digesting it. So we added Vermont and we added Las Vegas. We also added a nonprofit, Natural Gas Vehicle Alliance, and we added a couple of businesses, Waste Management, which is one of the large companies that collects waste in the US, and a couple of consultants that build digesters. So the stakeholders have been really, really critical from the proposal all the way through the work that we've done. We've run inputs by them. So if we're thinking of using certain things as inputs in the tool, we've checked to make sure that that's data that they have readily on hand. We've asked them for suggestions in terms of outputs. Some examples, the stakeholders came up with the idea of wanting to analyze food waste from corporate campuses. So they thought that rather than collecting residential food waste, there may be some kind of low-hanging fruit opportunities to collect food waste from companies, large companies that are in an area. So that was something that we added to the tool that they thought of. In terms of outputs, we had just cost benefit, but they said it'd be useful to have dollars in terms of tons of CO2 reduced. They suggested that it'd be useful to have cost of composting for comparison. We hadn't thought of that. So you have cost of digestion and then comparison for composting. In some cases, we thought of something to do that they've told us was not a productive idea. So we had an idea for optimizing truck sizes that we thought was cool. We have some optimization people on our team, but then the stakeholders told us, well, we use 30 cubic yard trucks for collecting the trash, and that's what we use, and that's what we're going to use, right? So developing something to optimize truck size, not worthwhile. So we've gotten a lot of good feedback from the stakeholders as we've gone along, and we hope that that's going to make it something that they'll actually use when we're all said and done. So I will stop there.
Okay. Mr. Morris, would you like to go next? You should have power to share screen. In fact, I think a few of you had something to share.
I think maybe you were going to share the slides for him, James.
Let me see if I can pull them up.
Mr. Morris, I think you are muted.
It's very nice to be with you all today. Melanie, it's nice to see you again. James, are you able to pull up my slides?
I'd have to check through email. Sorry, I thought everybody.
Or Melanie, do you have them?
You know what, hey, why don't we go to somebody else and I'll find them.
Okay. I think Karabi also had some slides.
You want me to go next?
Sure.
Okay. Let me share my screen. Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Karabi Bezboruah, and thanks for having me today here. And it's really nice to sit on this esteemed panel. I have known Melanie like all my life, and we have worked together with her on a project recently, and we published out of it. So this is a very interesting panel, especially the topic, because this is something we struggle every day in public affairs. So I'm from a discipline that is very, very traditional in terms of how we are evaluated. So journal articles, that's what matters. Nothing else matters, right? So when I was on the tenure track, that's the only thing I heard. And so that's how I've been sort of trained as a PhD student and then as a tenure track faculty member to just publish or perish. So that has been the driving force for most of the publication. And I'm just being very honest here. So integrating policy becomes a very, very challenging issue when you are just focused on publication, especially because when we integrate policy, there has to be the engagement of stakeholders, the engagement of practitioners. So this is the policy process. I just brought it thinking there might be students here in the audience who might want to know what I exactly do. So this is the policy making process, and from problem identification to designing the policy and adopting it and then implementing and administering it to policy evaluation. That's the complete cycle. So in this cycle, where I fit in, my research fits in, are two areas: policy making, what influences or what are the influencing factors that lead to policy making, and then how are the policies, once they are implemented, how are they evaluated, how are they, what kind of reviews are done on them. So for today's session, I'm just focusing on transportation. This is a small piece of my research. And in the policy making area, I have looked at how media narratives have influenced transportation policy making decisions, especially regards to safe streets and so forth. And the other piece was how advocacy organizations play a role in influencing policy. So how does these different aspects fit into this whole policy making area in transportation? And then in policy implementation and evaluation, I have looked at how policies that have been implemented, like for example, the Summer Food Service Program, which is a federal program, how is it administered in the Arlington ISD? So what are the transportation and the logistics challenges of providing food to the different schools within that district? The other one is what I'm working on right now is the transportation logistic again of providing charitable food from the food bank to the different, through the partner agencies to the different communities all over North Texas. So we have started this project, and the field work will be done this summer. So again, we're looking at how food is transported and what's the best way to do it and what are the challenges that are in it. So policy integration, well, just like James gave a very fascinating introduction about where do you start integrating policy? Well, it starts at the very beginning when we conceptualize the research, with the conception and the design of the research. This is where we need to have the participation of stakeholders and practitioners so that there is this collaboration from the very beginning, and we understand what is expected by each party. And then it's integrated in the research question, in the methodology. And so it's an integrated process. Now, this is what is advised all the time, but in reality, like I said earlier, since I'm in a very traditional program, we focus mostly on just getting published, write papers. If there is a data set, get it, crunch the numbers, write a paper and publish. So that has been, again, the driving force. But I did some projects that took longer. And I think James already mentioned that when you have, when you actually integrate policy, it takes sometimes longer because how academics work and how practitioners work are very different. Sometimes some of the things that I have taken to practitioners, they are like, oh, this happened too many years ago. Well, because we take 2 years to publish a paper. From acceptance to publication, sometimes it's 2 years. So, the literature review is already too late. So that has been quite a barrier for most of the work I have done. But at the same time, I have seen that when I've worked with practitioners, I have, just like James said, I have been to city council meetings, I have shadowed community members, community organizations, and community activists as they go around community and taking, feedback from the grassroots organization and then integrating policy. And I felt that at the, the end of the day, when I look at what I have done and what I have accomplished, I have seen that, well, all my current research are mostly academic, so they have been published in journals, and that's how I got tenure. So the outcomes is published, but the impact is questionable. The impact is questionable because, again, I don't know if anybody's reading them. I have seen that people are citing my work, but these are all scholars. Like, is it really making an impact in the real world? So that academic to practice literature, I need to work on that. And I've seen that my projects that have had policy integration right from the very beginning with feedback from practitioners and stakeholders, they have been implemented, like in this Grow South Dallas, that was one where it was implemented. And then another one in Collin County's healthcare policy. Some of the work I have done with the community organizations have been implemented. So it feels good when there is a, impact in the community. So it's a barrier that we need to sort of address. And some of the things that I have seen recently is that many of the academic journals in my field, they invite practitioners to comment on scholarly journals or scholarly articles. Then we have what is called, like a 2-minute video on social media or podcast that talks only about like what are the big takeaways from each article, like this, like summarize the articles and then talk about it and how does it impact practitioners, just to have that bridge between what's academic and what's in practice or how it could help practice. So one of the things that we recently, I'm on a journal board, we talked about is why not do we have both? Have the academic articles, but at the same time, make sure that there are policy briefs that come out of these articles that can help practitioners. And also there needs to be a mind chains about, like what would count in your tenure packet? Would policy briefs count? Would your work in the community count? For us, till about 2 years ago, that didn't count at all. But now things have changed and we are becoming much more integrated with the communities. So these things are being counted. So at the end, I would like to, like the young scholars to think about not just how you ramp up your tenure dossier, but also what kind of impact you want to have on the communities. So that should be the driving factor when you think about your research design. Thank you.
James, this is Michael Morris. Can you hear me? Professor, before you leave your slides, could you bring your slides back up?
Sure, I can. Let me
Is that too late?
No, it is not. Okay.
I think you brought up a very good observation. If you go back to the slide, I think 2-3 slides ago, where you go in a certain order, there.
Okay.
So this is, no,
No?
go back one.
Okay.
Go Go back one slide.
Oh, on top?
Okay. So, no,
Oh, sorry.
one with
Okay.
the box.
That one.
That one.
Okay, great.
Okay, so you make this in your training to
Mhm.
be tenured. You went through a process going left from right, and then the good news is now tenured, and you're now asking questions. Maybe this isn't the best process. I actually think this process is actually backwards.
Okay.
That's the only reason I'm showing it.
Okay.
I think if you listen to what Wood is saying and what I'm going to say in my presentation, is if you engage in the stakeholders, you got an opportunity of creating a subject that's going to have great interest to someone that has to implement it in the real world.
Mhm.
You then conduct the literature search to see if enough has already been done to answer that question. Probably not, because that application person doesn't have a solution to his problem, or he or she would have already implemented it. Then you have to integrate the research questions to get to it. And then you have to go ahead and provide a study design to actually help the person. So as you work forward with the modernization of tenure, I actually think the process that you had to go through, actually for the purposes of today, is actually backwards.
Mhm.
It actually, I think, is in the other order. So Dr. Wood, if you would you go to my presentation? I have a short presentation. My background is like Melanie's. It's in civil engineering, but it's in transportation. I graduated from State University at Buffalo with a master's in civil engineering. I'm licensed in civil engineering in Texas. I happened to spend 6 years on the Transportation Research Board Executive Committee. I became chair of the Transportation Research Board, and I'm a member of the National Academies. So it's from this perspective, and now 40 years in public service, it's from this perspective that I think I can give some insight with regard to how to transform research into transportation policy. Let me begin on the next slide with how it is done on the technology side, not on the policy side. So this is the technology readiness scale. This is what's used by NASA to score technologies. We're in the middle of high-speed rail between Dallas and Fort Worth. We have scored dozens of technology. 2 are making it, high-speed rail and Hyperloop. This is how they were scored. Because I was recently given this to several public presentations, and Melanie asked me to speak to you today, university professors like to be as left as they possibly can on this scale. That's how you get your tenure. On a bad day, you'll go into the applied research side, and oh my God, I hope I never get into those 2 right boxes, because that's like application people. Application people like me, we spend our world in the 2 right boxes. I actually have federal law opposed to my ability to use the word research in my planning activities. And if I use the word research, it is not eligible for reimbursement on the federal government. So they want me to stay caged in these 2 right areas. Consultants, they're all the way to the right. You start drifting too far over, the consultants will slap your hand and say, now you're too much into the application. So communication is a wonderful thing. So my theme is we got to get to this communication part. Dr. Wood talked about it. You have to do it early in your career. It's hard. You're a postdoc. You're a new person to maybe a community. You got to develop the outreach communication early in order to, I think, have your greatest chance of success and be helpful in the community. So I call it on the next slide, find places for partnership. It's probably not in basic research. If you knocked on my door and said, I'd like you to partner with us on some basic research, my money's not even eligible for you. Applied research is getting closer, still hard. So I think Dr. Wood used the term technology transfer for one of our speakers. I always use pilot projects, use cases, and technology transfer. Those are the words that I use to get around my federal restrictions and where I love to partner with universities. Now, when you do pilot projects, use cases, and technology transfer, you can slide back into the research areas without taking a sharp stick and having some federal accountant say, wait a minute, that's not eligible for reimbursement. I actually have funded 2 partnership programs with universities. So I put our money where our mouth is by actually reaching out to the universities, just like universities, in my opinion, need to reach out to those in the application field. So we have 2.5 million, all the tier 1 universities, and it goes to the tier 1 transportation, tier 1 universities in our region. It's for technology research. I try to get the Hyperloop certification facility here. The financial commitment was for Hyperloop to be able to reach out to our tier 1 universities and help build and implement Hyperloop technology in the region. I told my board, the Regional Transportation Council, even if we don't get the certification facility, which we didn't, we would still want a home for technology research in our tier 1 universities. The other research partnership I have, which I have on the next slide in 1 second, is with UTA and the University of Texas and Texas Southern University on transportation, fill in the blank. It could be for anything. If you go to the next slide, I talk more about this earlier partnership program. So it started in 2007. When asked, we teach graduate seminars, not necessarily full courses. I really don't want our staff to get drugged completely in, but they are asked from time to time to teach a course. I probably every year am teaching a graduate seminar at the University of Texas in the LBJ school or in the civil engineering school. We fund interns. I think the overlapping area here is the students. You hopefully care about students. We care about students because they're future employees. A common theme here is students. That's one way maybe to help with regard to it. We actually fund professors and students to do projects. So we do this every year where we reach out to the different schools at UTA and in University of Texas and pick projects to do over the coming year. The ABET, external ABET committee is a good place to develop relationships. I chaired for a long time the UTA Civil Engineering ABET external committee. Dan Lamer's on our staff, currently chairs that particular committee. That is a place to have new professors meet external people. By definition, the ABET committee is all external people. And this is the part of engineering schools to maintain their certifications and ability to license feedback from external partners with regard to their particular programs. And then when I was chair at TRB, we created the Minority Partnership Program where we send a minority student to TRB every year to present their research from the previous year. So we do it as a TRB tuition program. That's how I get around that particular requirement. And that student from Texas Southern goes every year to be with other students from historic Black universities to present at the Transportation Research Board meeting in January. The last slide I have is back to this. You really reach out, and why I asked to reverse your process. You really reach out and develop relationships as people. I think that's what Dr. Wood was, find common ground. Where are you? Hey, can we meet with you? Can we Zoom with you? Can we have lunch with you? We have some, professors in our school, and can you give us 30 minutes on what issues you're dealing with and what issues we may be able to help you with? In our particular case, we can do it through our formal university partnership programs, but sometimes it begins with those just simple relationships. Be innovative in your program idea. So, hey, in the case of the work Melanie's doing, let me reach out to the sewage treatment plants and see if I can enhance my research into something in the application world, because I know they're struggling with this particular issue in the treatment of solid waste, develop, some innovative elements. Those innovations often in our world they're like wildfire. You develop an innovative next generation traffic signal timing program, those things often advance. You develop a sensor for trains 2 miles before crossing to know a car is stuck on the crossing to minimize fatalities. That little software technology can get mainstream pretty quickly. And be sensitive to others. You send your paper that you use to get tenure that has 83 logit equations and 3 integral signs, and you're trying to give that to the head of transportation for the state of Texas. That's not going to help you. You're trying to impress someone to get tenure. He's trying to solve a problem. That's a disconnect in communication is a wonderful thing. Be careful in your use of the word research, because to some, it's not even applicable. Once you say research, then I can't help you. If you say basic, I can't help you. If you say technology transfer or use studies or partnership ideas, then those are ways to proceed. The other thing is one size does not fit all. You could have a Michael Moore somewhere who loves to read your logit equations and your interval equations and look for your errors. But most of the time, that's not where we do have the time. Would rather say, look, we're struggling with how to deal with this particular equity issue. Can we solve, say, food deserts? Do we solve it with, delivery systems, getting internet to everyone's house and deliver food to food deserts? Do we financially subsidize food stores to locate inside food deserts? Or do we warehouse food and or develop transportation systems to get people to grocery stores in seamless transportation or transit modes or transit passes or some other solution? So it won't be a one size fits all. And find those common interests. And sometimes it's the student. Hey, I have a student that's really interested in this subject. Or can you come talk to our students? Or do you have internships for our students? And then all of a sudden you're building research programs for the teachers and the students as part of that process. I'll stop there and see if we have any questions of me after our other speaker. Thank you.
And Dr. Tanvir, would you like to add your voice?
Yeah, thank you so much. And this has been really helpful, Dr. Rood and Dr. Sattler. Thanks for arranging this. I myself is learning a lot. And as a fresh tenure track assistant professor in civil engineering program, I try to establish connection with stakeholders, and learning about how to do that is definitely going to be very helpful for me. I can try to put my unique perspective here where I am coming from. So I did my PhD in civil engineering and transportation engineering from North Carolina State University. And right after I joined Triangle Regional Model, which is the MPO for the area of Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill. So that was kind of, it belongs to that applied research category, not basic research. It had implementation or development component in there. So quickly I learned that my advisor in my PhD school and my supervisor in PRM they have completely different perspective and completely different needs on what type of things that they focus on. And they always wanted to make sure the kind of work or the kind of product that I push out as a fresh PhD, I wanted to be very technical, but my supervisor was making sure that I push out something that's useful for the industry and that gets an impact into the society. And later I joined as a research engineer in University of California, Riverside. And that particular location was very known for its research on emissions and air quality. And so in California, we are fortunate to have agencies like California Air Resources Board and our local air quality management districts who are very engaged into understanding how this field of basic research in air quality is advancing and what kind of latest emissions reduction and exposure reduction works are being done. So in a way, we kind of had our projects handed to us rather than we asking for them and going to writing proposals into some scholarly venues. We were directly getting projects from CARB or from air quality management districts. So that was really helpful for me to kind of get the ground on the applied side of it. So the engagement was kind of built in. But when I accepted this job in Cal Poly last fall, which is in the middle of the pandemic, that's when I realized that, as a full-time tenure track faculty who has also teaching responsibility and student mentoring responsibility, it's very hard to carve out your time to make the same level of connections that I was used to having before in my previous jobs. So I quickly realized that I probably need to narrow my focus down rather than being dispersed over many different topics, which I am interested in because of the growing nature of the field in transportation that I'm in. I need to kind of make my preferences and make sure to have really some good connection in the industry and in the agencies that I'm interested in. So in that regard, I kind of wanted to give an example of a project that I am right now leading and working on. So this is a project that we got from University of California ITS program, and it's on the understanding the traffic impact of COVID on the localized air quality in the Southern California air basin. The project idea started in 2020, right around March and April timeframe. That's when the pandemic kind of began. But we did not have like a very well-formed policy landscape surrounding that topic. I myself, as a researcher, felt the need to make some observation about the situation and understand how that observations regarding air quality and traffic might impact the different policy questions that the different agencies in that area might be asking. So we wrote that proposal without consulting, because we did not have time to consult our stakeholders, and I wasn't quite engaged at that time with the stakeholders in my new position. So we wrote that proposal without consulting. But fortunately, we had that component of stakeholder engagement as a advisory committee inbuilt into the project. So the scope that we begin with kind of changed and evolved as we got the feedback from the different stakeholder concerning air quality and transportation in the Southern California region. So for example, we had members from California Air Resources Board, Caltrans, Southern California Air Quality Management District. We have the different cities within the Southern California Air Basin area. And the members had kind of their own perspective on the same problem. So in a way, I felt like this project enabled the different practitioners and agency leaders within that particular region to kind of break between their silos, because they were coming up with their own ideas. And this advisory committee was in a way a good opportunity for the different practitioners in the area to kind of interact among themselves and come up with, and really find that some of the questions that one group is asking may be in line with the need of the other. So I wish I could have engaged my stakeholders earlier in the writing stage of the proposal, but I could not do that. But what fascinating is that the transportation and the societal problems are multidimensional. So if I say, let's say I have proposed a certain outcome for this project, but then just by tweaking that certain outcome a little bit or changing the presentation of that outcome in a way that might be useful for a wide range of audience, because this is such a multidimensional problem. And if I am addressing just one part of it, some of the usefulness of the same outcome can be used by the others. I felt in terms of the barrier, language is a big problem. We as academics try to use jargons a lot, and we have a lack of emphasis on actionable items. We try to get those research questions more focused in our research papers that shows kind of the academic innovation or uniqueness of our products, rather than focusing on the more actionable tasks that can come out of those research products. And then I felt like even the most technical of our conferences, like Transportation Research Board annual meeting, we have some committees who are successful in engaging external stakeholders, the agency leaders and the practitioners, but some committees are not. And I felt like giving, even for the most technical of the conferences, there should be allocated time to hear from what the policymakers and practitioners have to say about that particular topic. It should not be fully academic, or it should not be fully technical. It needs to have some sort of balance in there. And I felt social media sites like LinkedIn and Twitter to be a very useful media to make connection and build relationship with the policymakers and practitioners. And especially I felt like what I try to do, because there are so many social media sites and I get lost sometimes. So I try to maintain my presence in LinkedIn specifically, because I felt like lots of my professional colleagues are in LinkedIn. And whenever I have an interview or I have published a new paper, I try to write a small blurb about what's kind of like the very simple takeaway message from that paper. So in a way, that's like my own personal press release. And I've seen that a lot of my colleagues in the industry, they have reshared my post. Or they have commented like, hey, I really like this idea, like why shouldn't you try this idea or the other? So that's why I felt like we should be able to have some common places where we can interact. I felt in my position as if tenure track research faculty, it's very hard for us to find that time. And especially during this COVID, I felt that kind of not social isolation, but it's kind of like scholarly isolation. I don't get PRB 2021 was all remote. All my professional conferences are getting virtual. So the kind of spontaneity or the responses that I was having by interacting with my colleagues during in-person conferences, I'm missing that. So hopefully giving those opportunities would improve that interaction and also help us to build more connections. And with that, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we move into the next part of the workshop, which is a sort of an exercise to walk through a more practitioner-oriented research design, were there any questions from the audience that maybe the panel could answer while I set up the next slides? And you can use the Q&A or the chat option.
There was a comment. Dr. Shams, I think Cal Poly has an advantage in being able to speak the applied research language. being focused on hands-on learning, more practical and applied research is built into Cal Poly's way of doing things. I don't know if you have a comment on that.
So yeah, I absolutely agree with that point. And that's one of the reasons why I like that teacher-scholar model that Cal Poly has adopted, which sometimes is, like it doesn't create as much pressure for you to publish, but rather have more diversified way of presenting how you are doing your professional development. It could be through your applied research or your consulting or community outreach projects. So yeah, that's a good thing that we have.
Okay. I think I'll pull up the exercise, and it'll be a brief overview, and then Dr. Sattler will draw in some participation from the audience in the panel. So just pull up. Are you able to see the slides? Okay. So to walk through briefly how to structure this, it's not exactly a research design course, but so as Michael Morris said, I think the most critical part is to pay attention to what's going on in your community, not necessarily in your discipline nationally or globally, but what's going on locally. Look for headlines about unanswered questions or information gaps or controversies. I think for me, one of the best parts of local journalism, and sadly one of the parts that's going away fastest, is what they call the city beat. Journalists at local newspapers and magazines who study issues of transportation and government. In North Texas, we have D Magazine. They do a lot of sort of work in the urban planning area, and they cover issues and information gaps. So it's good to get an idea for what's going on in your community, what's unknown, it's a little more localized and a little more feet on the ground than what the national literature might say. And maybe you can find a few topics that are interesting to you and also useful to practitioners. And by that, I mean something that's current and informative to where your contribution might actually help immediately. As an example, when I first came to CTEDD, I was a postdoc researcher before I became program manager. I was new to North Texas, and I sat down to come up with ideas for my first research project. And I read several newspaper articles and magazine items about dockless bike share in Dallas and Fort Worth, and apparently, especially Dallas. It was a huge controversy a few years ago where this new transportation option just sort of dumped bicycles on the sidewalk and didn't really tell the city of Dallas they were coming, didn't give them a chance to set up a regulatory framework or a safety framework. Most of the companies were overseas. They weren't registered here. We didn't know much about them. So it was an information gap, but also a need for regulation, for support, because the city, before they can regulate something that might be harmful, they first need to understand it. So my first study came out of the newspapers. I'm not a bicycle specialist at all, but I learned, but it was because it was this controversial item. And one of the deliverables that my group came up with was a model ordinance that we wrote and put in our packet. So we sent that to all the cities we worked with, and they can integrate it. The dockless bike share thing became kind of a fad. They're all gone now. So those ordinances never had to be written, but it was a way to apply our work going beyond just a study about bike share, but to help people fix it. Next, it helps to map out the policy-making process in that area to understand what steps are taken between the conceptualization of a policy or a solution and actually making it happen. Understand who makes the decisions and how. If you're researching transportation at the local or regional level, that's the MPO. So understand what your MPO or your council of governments, what's their purpose, what's their role. They have a lot on their mandate. They handle transportation and housing and air quality and federal funding, both requests for it and distribution of it. It's a lot of information. They're a data clearinghouse as well. So if you want to study something about sidewalks or older adult transportation, what's that decision-making process like? Who do you need to get this information to, and how can you help them make it happen? And this step 4 really should be earlier, as Mr. Morris said. Contact the stakeholders directly. It's not enough to list out who works in this field, but talk to them. And like with the dockless bike share project, we talked to a few cities and most of them said, yes, this is a problem. We have no idea how to solve it. Please help us. But a few of them did say, we're already on top of it. We're taking care of it. Thanks anyway. So it helps to understand where and how you can help in concrete terms. As a sample topic, which maybe Dr. Sattler might talk about a little bit more, is, for example, if you're in Atlanta or you just have an interest in Atlanta, and maybe you want to do something broadly about children who cycle to school as opposed to taking the bus or walking. So to understand, that's a pretty broad topic. What do you want to look at in that topic? Issues of safety, the infrastructure for safe cycling. Are there bike lanes, sidewalks, what have you? Oversight, who is managing these programs if there are structured programs? Is it a growing problem in the region? Are you the only one thinking about this? That is possible. As an academic, our minds are very active, and just because we think something is a hot topic, you should make sure other people do as well. So sort of break down that topic, and this is research design stuff. Most of this should sound somewhat familiar. And look for ideal stakeholders. Look for people who can get you information and work with you on a project. And I've listed a few examples here, and they can help with specific things. For example, the best place for transportation data is always your MPO. In this case, the Atlanta Regional Commission. Next, bring them on as full partners for your stakeholders. Don't just get a letter that says you will mail them a copy of your report. Integrate their needs and their perspective from the start. And also think about policy formation as a core goal. I mentioned my group, we wrote a model ordinance that was useful for my student researchers because they had never written a model ordinance, and it was a chance for them to learn how to write such a thing and that whole process. But make sure that if you're investigating a problem, that you come up with some real solutions. Nobody likes to read a paper that exposes a problem and then at the end of it just says more research is needed. That's not too helpful in the policy world. So when you write your questions, look for actionable responses and results and methods that can be useful to a policy audience. So refine your research question with the help of your stakeholders. And then I think closing out, keep in touch regularly with your partners. Don't just send them a report at the end. Have progress reports. Have them weigh in on what you've written up. When you write your deliverables, consider phased deliverables. A few CTEDD projects do it this way, where they send us regular technical memos and just like monthly progress reports, basically. They're not required, but it's helpful. Or if you do a workshop, bring these stakeholders along, have them help you, and have them weigh in on what you're doing, for better or worse, so that it's integrated along the way and that they're not surprised at the very end. And Maybe, I know Dr. Sattler's projects have worked with task forces, advisory committees, and small digestible technical items that are useful to people in the field. And I think we can get more into this in the exercise portion, but and Dr. Sattler, would you like to take it from here? Oh, you muted.
So I'll share my screen, and the panelists, we appreciate all of you being here. And so you're welcome to join us in the exercise, but if you have time constraints, then and we appreciate everybody's presentation and perspective on the issue. I'm going to share my screen now, and what I've got. So hopefully you can see my screen. So could everybody see? Okay. Okay, so what I've got the framework for policy-oriented research design that Dr. Wood just went over. And what we wanted to do was a interactive exercise. So we wanted the participants to be able to actually go through this process, right? In a short abbreviated form. Because it's nice to hear somebody talk about it, but then it's more meaningful when you get to go through it on your own. So the first step is to brainstorm some current issues. And so Dr. Wood talked about looking in the newspaper for current issues. And so you may not have time to look in the newspaper during our session, but does anybody have some current issues that you see related to transportation in your city or your region? So some unanswered questions, information gaps. It can be kind of a large issue. So like in Dr. Wood's example, he started out with the issue of children bicycling to school. And that is kind of a broad area. So we've got a Q&A. So for participants, there should be a Q&A. So if you would like to type in the Q&A or the chat, if you have it, either one, what are some current issues that you see related to transportation in your city or region? So I'll give you a few minutes here. So let's see. Okay, we as a campus need to reduce our VMT, vehicle miles traveled, by 50% under the new campus master plan. Okay, great. So issue is they need as a campus to reduce their vehicle miles traveled by 50%. Okay, that's a great one. So I'm going to actually end the show here so I can type this on the slide. So, so the issue is need to reduce campus vehicle miles traveled by 50% according to their campus master plan. All right, thank you. So next step then, we want to identify 2 or 3 topics or questions that are interesting to researchers and useful to practitioners. So from that overall idea, are there 2 or 3 specific topics or questions that would be worth researching? So let's see. Okay, over 10 years. All right, we can add that. Okay, so 2 or 3 questions that are interesting to researchers. So does anybody have an idea? So specific question related to this overall topic of needing to reduce VMT by 50%. So I'll give you a minute to think about that. Okay, so we have ranking of different TDM strategies in reducing VMT. Okay, so what travel demand management strategies would be most effective in reducing VMT? You could ask what TDM strategies would be cheapest, or you could ask what TDM strategies would be cheapest per VMT reduced. Right. Or you could ask maybe what TDM strategies students be most willing to adopt. Okay. Or if you're including everybody on campus, maybe faculty, staff. All right, so any other ideas for questions? Okay, so if we go on to the next step then, map out policy-making process. So is it conceptual, or are concrete actions being taken at present? Who makes the decisions and how? Okay, so there we could think about, if we were going to implement something, how would it be implemented, right? So who has authority over transportation decisions on campus? Okay, and it may be several people actually, right? There may be somebody that's in charge of parking. Raising parking fees would be one way to make people carpool, right? So that may be one person's authority. Then you may have somebody else that has authority over the shuttle buses on campus, that kind of thing. So who has authority over transportation decisions on campus? And maybe who has authority over funding decisions? So that may be somebody else.
Dr. Sattler?
Uh-huh.
You could maybe also ask, what's the role of campus environmental groups in this case? Maybe there are student groups or faculty groups maybe applying political pressure for, environmental reform, climate change. Maybe they have a voice in this, maybe not too much of a voice, but a voice in the policy process.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that could even be another question. We could go back here and ask, what would air quality benefits be of reducing the VMT? Right? Or health benefits, right? So along with strategies, you could ask maybe what incentives would motivate students, faculty, and staff. Okay, so there was a comment in the question box that students you can force to do things, but the real problem is faculty and staff, right? So how do you get faculty and staff to change? Local city administration has a role in approving any housing strategy related to reducing VMT. Yeah, so that's a good point. So let's put that on our next slide. So we'd have city administration that would need to approve housing related to VMT. So if you're trying to say make density greater around campus, so you want to build a lot of apartment complexes close to campus, it'd probably be Planning and Zoning Commission or someone at the city that would need to approve that if it was not already dense enough. Okay, so relevant stakeholders. So we started that a little bit here. We have government officials. We listed environmental groups. Okay, so on campus, we have the students, faculty, staff. We have city. So city administration. You could add citizens who live near campus. So they would probably benefit from the reduced VMT. They would also benefit from the improvements in air quality. Any other ideas for stakeholders?
Maybe campus transportation.
Yes, so the campus transportation. So shuttle buses may be owned and operated by the campus itself. They may be, that may be contracted out to a private company, but they would certainly be a stakeholder.
Parking enforcement.
Yes. So that's likely a source of revenue for the campus. So if you decrease people needing to park on campus, then you may decrease a source of revenue there. All right, so now we want to look at creating a research design that includes policy formation or change as a core goal. Research questions that apply policy knowledge terms, methods, and deliverables useful to a policy audience. And we can look at phased or staggered deliverables. So if we go back up and look at our questions. So a stakeholder would be also whoever is responsible for implementing the plan, the campus plan that's supposed to reduce the emissions by, or the TDM by 50%. Okay. So university administration responsible for implementing the plan. All right, so we want to make sure that our deliverable addressed university administration in particular, right? And told them strategies that would be most effective, right, in reducing VMT. So maybe cheapest per VMT. We'd want to recommend strategies that students, faculty, and staff would be most willing to adopt. And these different stakeholders that we've talked about could probably help in developing the strategies. So we could write a couple of ideas here, right? So we could conduct some brainstorming meetings with various stakeholders to brainstorm or to come up with TDM ideas. And then we could perhaps develop a rating or ranking system for the ideas based on how they appeal to students, faculty, and staff. So based on appeal to students, faculty, staff, economics, air quality benefits, and then perhaps make an overall recommendation to university administration on the most effective strategies. Okay, so does anybody have input on research questions that apply policy knowledge or terms? So we have some questions here. Does anybody have suggestions for integrating some policy-oriented terms into these questions?
So are the policy-oriented questions, are they supposed to be more narrowed down or focused compared to your original research questions? Or how, I'm trying to understand how they're different from, as a researcher, the type of questions that we're asking versus what's the policy-oriented research questions?
Well, that's a good question. I think the question would be the same, but the suggestion is to use policy-oriented terms. Yeah, I guess that's where we need Dr. Bezboruah back. So she's the policy terminology expert, but she needed to go, unfortunately. All right, so if we look at methods and deliverables useful to a policy audience, so a rating system or ranking system hopefully be useful. We have an overall recommendation. Let's see, we could also conduct some surveys, right? So conduct surveys of students, faculty, staff, if we're trying to figure out what is going to be most appealing. In terms of staggered deliverables, there's actually some staggering built in here. So you have a master list, a big list of ideas, all the ideas that you come up from your brainstorming meetings, right? And then you start to narrow those down based on your criteria, ranking system. And then you end up with overall recommendation at the end. You know, it maybe as part of this, the rating or ranking system could be made available to stakeholders at other universities. So if other universities were needing to reduce their TDM, maybe they could use the same rating or ranking system. So that might be another deliverable that could go beyond the one university. Let's see if we go back to our stakeholders. If we added an estimate of the not only rated the options based on economics and air quality, but if we had as an output estimate of the air quality and congestion benefits of reducing the TDM, that might be useful. If we're looking at environmental groups, they might want to know that. The citizens who live near campus might be interested in knowing that. And then parking enforcement and the university administration, especially in terms of the economics. I didn't add that. Estimate of the air quality, congestion benefits, and cost of reducing the TDM. Parking enforcement and the university administration might want to know the anticipated cost. All right, so any other ideas or comments?
I would just want to add, this is Anurag Pandey, by the way. I submitted this question at the very beginning. So
Yes.
I just was wondering, I think we are probably, just so maybe I didn't realize, but I think maybe the transit company or the transit provider of the community might be interested as well, just in terms of thinking about what's going to be the services required of them. If there is going to be all these policy changes, they might have to revamp their service to this campus, you know. So I think they might be interested in knowing the ridership impacts and so forth.
That's a great point. And we wouldn't tend to think of that in Arlington. So I don't know if you were in one of the sessions yesterday, but we've got.
I know. I'm familiar with the transit challenge in Arlington, yes.
Or not in the world, in the US with no mass transit. Yeah, but that's a great point.
One other idea about policy-oriented design, maybe we can have a pilot demonstration of the most relevant strategies to understand the efficacy of the stadiums.
Oh, that's a great idea. And that goes along with what Michael Morris said also, right? That agencies are interested in pilot demonstrations, right? So before they invest a lot of time or energy in something, they want to know that it really works. So that's a part of a phased approach as well. That's a good suggestion. So other thoughts? All right, we appreciate everybody participating. So hopefully this gave you some ideas of how to start thinking through some of these issues. And now we have a conclusion slide. So James, would you like to come back and go through your conclusion slide?
Sure. And thanks everybody for participating. I think that this is exactly the sort of framework that we see. And as you can see, a very small item that just comes, in the case of Cal Poly, it's just sort of dropped on the university, or people might see it in their inbox. When you start to dissect it and think about it, it becomes a much larger topic that touches on all kinds of things. And hopefully that is exciting to a researcher to see that there are so many different questions to answer and ways to look into it. But yeah, in general, in conclusion, let me pull that up. And so you want to wrap things up with your shortcomings, and if you have any, and if you've been open to your stakeholders this whole time, they will hopefully feel empowered to tell you what you might have missed or need work with next time. So have those sort of, post-publication meetings and maintain those contacts. Even if it's just checking in with them a few times a year, that's a helpful part. So concluding, we're working in different realms, but policymakers and academics have a shared goal of improving our communities, and their outcomes, their job is stronger when they work together. We know that turning research into policy is a complex skill. It can take years in some cases to get information into the right heads at the right time to make change happen. But it really seems to be that the hardest part is getting started on one of these projects and figuring out the right team to assemble and the right topics to address. But once something gets started, it may take a long time. You might meet a faculty member who has worked in an area for 30 years, maybe on an issue of childhood poverty or water pollution. Those issues still exist 30 years, from then, and they can't expect to solve it overnight, but to get started on that path will hopefully be very fulfilling for people. But if you're able to find a good stakeholder and work with them as a partner, hopefully that will lead to results in a shorter amount of time, because for starters, you will know who to give your information to. And when they receive it, it's very likely they will actually read what you give them and put it into practice. And you won't have to worry about it getting put on a bookshelf and ignored. You'll have the confidence to know that your partners will implement your work and that you've actually made something happen pretty quickly. These things of using shared constructive language, shared goals, building trust are a good part of that relationship. And as with any human relationship. And again, I'll say it again, find ways to go beyond the journal article. You can write letters to the editor. Maybe people don't really remember that, it's kind of a lost art, but newspapers and magazines will publish sensible commentary. They seem to publish nonsensical commentary, but if you are professors, you are postdocs or graduate students, you have social capital as a trained technical professional. You know things that many in your community do not know. And there's an implicit trust and an understanding that you know what you're talking about. So if you write something and put it in, the newspaper for publication, it might just be a commentary on a political situation or maybe something that's up for a vote. But if you can sort of lend your credibility to that as a scientist and an expert, because you are an expert, you can shape the conversation. And you can reach out to other people, like for podcasts or magazine articles or civic groups like the Tarrant Transit Alliance, Transit Center. These groups are made up of people who care about the issues, but they might need your expertise. They're not transit people or civil engineers. They need your information. They need your help to grow their advocacy. And maybe you can find a simple way to work with them. Like Michael said, have lunch with somebody, or maybe you know somebody, maybe you have children who are on the same soccer team or something. You can find some way to hopefully work with people that aren't just in the academic sphere. So anything that helps to go beyond the publications, we're happy to support that. We're glad to see so many of the people we support go on to get tenure, which is built in large part on traditional publications. But it seems like most of the departments we deal with nowadays, they're moving tenure standards beyond just publications into community engagement and making you a well-rounded expert in what used to be called the public intellectual, that in the 1950s through 1970s or so, you could, as a professor, you could have a lecture in the evening on a general topic, and it's open to the public. And members of the public might come and hear you talk about something that's accessible to them. And those have gone down in popularity, just like bowling and network television. But that's a role you could fill if you're interested. At my old university, they had something that I think we should try elsewhere. It was called policy pubs, where once a month the university would rent out a restaurant, like a dining room of a restaurant in town, and they would invite a professor from mostly social science, but sometimes engineering, to sort of stand up and lead a kind of a seminar of people from the public. It was open to the public, and slideshows were strongly discouraged. I think they were allowed to have a single PowerPoint slide, but it was meant to be a Socratic conversation. And most of the people who came were maybe retired professionals or retired academics. It was a college town, but it got them out of the classroom and out of the journals and sharing new knowledge and information with people who want to hear it. And it's a good way to make contacts. People would hand you their business cards or invite you on their public access TV show. And it got those ideas out there, so people would talk about them with their friends and neighbors. Anything you can do in that angle, I think, would be helpful, not just to the community, but to your own career growth as well. So, think of yourselves as you're not just a tenure track faculty or just a postdoc. You are a trained, intelligent, motivated person who cares enough about these issues to devote a great portion of your life to it. So get out there and share your knowledge with the people who need it. And if there's nothing else from the panel, I think we can wrap up and wait on the final session, which starts at 3. And that involves a few people who were told to come in at 3, so we can't start it soon. We have to wait until 3 for others to come. So I guess that means we can take a break until 3 p.m. I'd really like to thank this workshop group, Dr. Tanvir, Dr. Sattler, Dr. Bezboruah, and Michael Morris, and also Anurag Pandey for his contributions. And I think this is a great conversation. I hope it's proven useful to the audience. So,
Thank you, Dr. Woods.
thanks.